Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. From the start, CMC has been open to everyone. I'm Kristen Easterday. I serve as the Director of Communications and Public Affairs with the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, and I'm a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Thank you. It's truly my pleasure to welcome you here today. And thank you to today's forum sponsors, AARP Ohio and HNTB. Today's CMC live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. So thank you all. I'd like to share a few comments from our presenting sponsor, AARP Ohio. AARP Ohio is committed to making Columbus and communities across the state more livable for people of all ages. That includes efforts to address transportation challenges and enhance mobility, which is why AARP Ohio is pleased to support today's forum. There are 14 cities and counties in Ohio, including Columbus and Franklin County, that are a part of AARP's network of age-friendly states and communities. AARP Ohio offers specialized support around livability issues, including housing, transportation, and economic development. AARP Ohio encourages you to find out more about the network of age-friendly states and communities through their Livable Communities e-newsletter, which is created for community influencers, leaders, and policymakers, and information can be found on the postcard at your table. AARP Ohio is proud of what age-friendly partners in Columbus are doing to enhance livability for all. And for more information, please contact AARP Ohio. And now, on behalf of AARP Ohio, it's my privilege to introduce today's topic and speakers. In fewer than 3 decades, Central Ohio is projected to be home to 3 million people. Covering just 40 square miles in 1950, the city now stretches over 225 square miles. Just how all these residents will move throughout this vast space is just part of the challenge facing the LinkUS Mobility Initiative. And today, Columbus Mayor Andrew J. Ginther and our panel will discuss LinkUS and mobility in Central Ohio. So let's please welcome Christie Angel, who will be joining us in just a few moments, who is President and CEO of the YWCA Columbus. Shannon G. Hardin, our President of the Columbus City Council. Monica Jones, Chief Equity Officer with the Central Ohio Transit Authority. William Murdock, Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and our host, Mike Thompson, Chief Content Director of News and Public Affairs with WOSU Public Media. Before we hear from our panel, it is CMC's great honor to invite Columbus Mayor Andrew J. Ginther to the podium to share his perspective on LinkUS. Mayor Ginther, the podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and great to be with you all back here again at the Metropolitan Club. Another very exciting topic. Really appreciate everyone's engagement and attendance as we talked about our efforts with Celebrate One just a few weeks ago. And another great opportunity for discussion, engagement here today around LinkUS, and really fortunate to have the panel that we have and to have Mike facilitating that conversation. LinkUS is a collective and collaborative effort for us to realize the full potential of our neighborhoods and surrounding areas. The city of Columbus, COTA, Franklin County, MORPC have come together as partners to launch LinkUS with the help of many of our residents and some of the folks here in the room today. We announced this effort in June of 2020 with the goal of changing how we build systems of mobility and transit in our region, and more broadly, how we manage growth in the coming decades. This is a regional issue and needs to be tackled regionally, and so grateful that the Mayor Maggard of Whitehall, and I saw City Manager Shannon from Upper Arlington here as well, and so many great leaders in our region, because this is something that we need to do together to do it successfully. This mobility and growth initiative has 6 critical priorities: equity, workforce advancement, economic development, affordability, innovation, and sustainability. We have the opportunity to proactively define our vision for Columbus and Central Ohio and take bold steps to build a region that will help address future growth and expand upon a system of corridors throughout the region that includes a focus on high-capacity advanced bus rapid transit, bicycle and pedestrian connections, safety improvements, new affordable housing, and a focus on workforce development and job opportunities. LinkUS will provide a consistent and equitable approach to implement transit and multimodal transportation improvements. It will link our neighborhoods and provide opportunity to the region's residents of today and that are coming tomorrow. We got here today by building upon key foundational planning efforts that drive the roadmap for implementing change in our region. We believe that LinkUS builds upon previous regional planning studies, including MORPC's Insight 2050 and the 2050 Corridor Concept Study, as well as COTA's Next Gen study. I'm sure you'll hear more about that from William Murdock in a moment. Currently, there are 2 projects in the planning phase of the corridor efforts: the Northwest Corridor along Olentangy River Road and the East-West Corridors, which includes the West Broad BRT Corridor and the East Main BRT Corridor, with more to come. I'm also pleased to share that we kicked off our LinkUS Leadership Coalition last month, being led by President and CEO of the partnership, Alex Fisher, President Hardin, and Commissioner John O'Grady, with a group of diverse community, business, and civic leaders who will provide insight and direction to the LinkUS Mobility, Prosperity, and Growth Initiative. We're grateful for their collaboration and leadership. It's critical to the success of our work. There's a document at your table that gives you an overview of LinkUS, and our panelists have quite a bit to share with you today to explain more. So I will turn it over to our moderator for today's discussion. From WOSU Public Media, please welcome Mike Thompson.
Let me change the name tag so I don't get the complaints about the mask mandate. Good afternoon, everybody. This is an exciting project. If you have tried to run or ride a bike on the Olentangy Trail on a nice afternoon at about 5 o'clock, you will see it is packed with people, a lot of commuters riding their bikes home from work. So it's obvious that many of our neighbors are looking for alternate ways of getting to and from work than their car. So let's get right into it. Mr. Murdock, let me start with you. We've had a lot of transportation studies and initiatives over the past decade or so. The mayor mentioned a couple of them: Insight 2050, Next Gen, Connect Columbus, Insight 2050, Corridor Concepts, Smart Columbus. What will LinkUS do that these projects did not, or what makes this project different?
Well, thanks, Mike, and thanks, everybody, for being here. It's exciting because we're building on so many efforts and so many efforts of individuals, communities, people demanding more today. And LinkUS is just that next step. I think it's important when you think about your question, Mike, to realize that Central Ohio is not the same region it was even 10 years ago. Yes, our character is still strong, the quality of life is still strong, but we're growing. And we're growing quickly, and that means that we need to be thinking not about just today, we need to be thinking about 10, 20 years down the road. And so one of our roles at MORPC, we think of ourselves as a future-focused local government partnership. So we're trying to help communities get ready for growth, get ready for the transportation system that we need. And one of the big projects that we did that kind of set the ball rolling was something we called Insight 2050. This was a partnership with ULI. I know our former chair, Yarmer Steiner, is here. The whole question there was, could we maintain our quality of life if we grow? Could we make the investments we need today to get in front of that growth and to provide people more options and to do those things that we care about: sustainability, inclusivity, housing? And what Insight 2050 taught us was that we have different choices about how we can grow. And we have different things we have to contemplate, whether it's demographics or technology or development patterns. And LinkUS builds on that analysis of what we found. We dug a little deeper in something we called corridor concepts, and what that did is that showed us that one of the ways we can accomplish the type of growth we want to accomplish is by looking at corridors that are underutilized for development, underutilized in terms of transportation options, and really hone in on how could we do this different. So this project comes out of that analysis about how could we grow better, how could we grow more inclusively, and at the core of that is mass transit. And as a region, I've been here most of my life. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but we're a lot bigger than we used to be, and we have to stop thinking about our mass transit needs that we had 20 or 30 years ago. We're big enough to demand and expect options, and what LinkUS looks at is how mass transit can be invested in these corridors, not just transit for transit's sake, but transit that drives development and drives jobs and drives sustainability. And LinkUS knits all that together in a way that could move us forward as a region pretty quickly and get us ready for growth. So you can tell we're pretty excited about how this sets us up for the next few decades. Yeah.
Real quick, so we can, because many of you probably haven't seen the website, haven't seen the pictures. Just really quickly, William, what would our transportation look like in those 10 or 20 years down the road? Bike paths, rapid transit buses, what would folks see?
Yeah, so LinkUS contemplates all of those things, but it fits really neatly into the other things that we need. Let me tell you this, if we don't do something now, we will experience congestion like we have not seen before. We can see our future of inaction if we look at some of the other regions around the country growing a little faster than us. If it's car dependent, that kind of congestion could just swallow our growth. What we're talking about with things like Rapid 5 and Central Ohio Greenways is bike trails and multimodal options and connecting neighborhoods. Transit, we're looking at fast, frequent, reliable service. So transit that's faster than taking your car. We're looking at pedestrian amenities that fit into that. This is a vision for transportation that is not some imaginary concept. This is done in some communities well, and it's something that we can do now that we're growing bigger. And LinkUS connects all these plans. So it's not just about mass transit, it's about mobility and sustainability and bike trails. And we're going to work on that Olentangy Trail, Mike. We've been working on it. So
maybe widen it a little bit now.
Absolutely.
You know, the CMC was not around when this happened, but back in the 60s and 50s, there probably was a meeting such as this praising a transportation project that was going to transform the region, that was all good, the construction of I-71. But President Hardin, your family and many others felt the unintended consequences. Perhaps they knew they were coming, but people didn't care, of how that neighborhood shut off a good portion of the city from jobs and things like that. How do we make sure we don't make those same mistakes again?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and thank you to the CMC for hosting this really important conversation, which is really about our region's growth strategy. As William said, we do have choices to make because one thing that the pandemic has changed a lot of things in our lives, but the one thing it has not changed for our region is our growth projections. We are still going to grow. We're still going to add folks, and the decisions that we make today and in the near future will determine what that growth looks like and who that is for. It was just a few years ago that I went over to our friends at MKSK, and I've always knew the story hearing from my grandmother who lived on Lexington Avenue on the Near East Side, that when the freeway system came through, that it displaced them. They had to move. Well, I always thought that was a story of a block or a few houses that had to move, and for the good of the public, that maybe that was okay. But when I went to MKSK and they did the overlay to show what really happened when the freeway system came through, it showed that over 400 homes were displaced, and we have to remember that in the 50s and 60s, the houses on the Near East Side didn't just house 2 or 3 folks. It housed 10 folks in those big homes. So really we displaced thousands of African American folks. Also we displaced 8 to 10 black-owned doctors and dentist offices in that space right there on the Near East Side. And so the decisions that we make with our infrastructure directly impact the quality of life for our community. And so what LinkUS does for us is allow us to lean into a growth strategy that prioritizes equity, that prioritizes housing and some of our biggest crises, one of our largest crises there, mobility, and our environment. And it allows us to, in the Columbus way, stack hands and align all the different planning that has been happening over many years to really, again, meet this critical decision point. We're going to grow. We're going to add 500,000 to 1 million people in the near future. And I say to friends all the time, to William's point, if you think that parking was bad in the short north, if we don't do something about focused growth, then that type of issue is coming to a neighborhood near you. And so we have a critical decision point to make about what kind of city that we want to live in and how that it will be a growth strategy that serves all of our residents.
Monica, 82% of Columbus residents commute by car, and they're the only ones in the car. They're commuting alone. If this plan comes to fruition, what's that number going to be?
I don't know that I have the answer to that question, but what I can tell you is that one of the reasons I was excited to come to COTA is that I see transportation as a social justice issue with an equity solution. And so I think at the core, transportation is a leverage to bring us together and to lift us up and to quote COTA's mission to move every life forward. And so I think, a part of this is that we've got to look at access to mobility means access to jobs and healthcare and education and the things that have been mentioned before. I think conversely, though, transportation can be used to divide us and to hold us back. And historically, that has happened here, as mentioned by Shannon. And so we have to be very mindful that when we talk about the impact of those highways and how they separated neighborhoods, that caused the deterioration of those areas. And so I think that as we are moving forward and we decide to reconnect the community, we must be intentional with that. And so LinkUS allows us to be intentional about that reconnection. In the past, COTA has engaged in solitary efforts to relocate services to where people are. LinkUS is a collaborative effort. It's the partners here today that are trying to be intentional and very direct. We are trying to build communities, including affordable housing, employment, around transportation corridors. And so I think it's a very intentional approach to transportation.
I'll throw the question to you. It's hard to get out of our cars. It's very convenient. Yeah, we're backed up on 315 or 70, 71 in the morning, but if we have a noon meeting, we can just jump in our car and go. How do you lower that number? Will this plan lower that number below that 82% mark? William, see is there a number that you're targeting? Is it 70%? Is it 60% getting out of their cars?
Well, I know we have goals that we're working towards, but when we think of LinkUS, we think the goal should be higher, our expectations should be higher. And, Mike, part of what we're talking about with LinkUS here, to answer that question, is to put transit, and COTA's done a great job with this, but put transit in a place where it's easy for folks to use, where it connects people to jobs. LinkUS also builds on that by building in amenities, connecting existing workforce centers, so that the easiest option becomes getting on transit instead of getting in your car. So that's part of the philosophy shift that we're making here. There's a lot of work to be done, but that's a big part of it.
You don't have any goal as to whether it's going to be 70% in their car alone or 60%, 65.3%?
I'll have to double check.
Okay,
my team's here, but I'll have to double check, yeah.
Christie, this is about getting people to good jobs. Transportation will get folks to there, but if they get to a job that's not paying a livable wage, that they ride in a nice bus to get to this job, but they still don't have enough money to pay their rent and their medical bills. Can transportation do that alone? Can a transportation system do that all by itself?
No, absolutely not. But this is not just about getting people to jobs. This is also about, connecting housing, along those transportation, along the corridors. It's also about other amenities that we all want, right, in our community, whether it's parks and, entertainment and restaurants and all of those things, and jobs. And, let's think about it. Transportation, the way it was designed before, is all about getting people out and in, right? And, now we have to think about transportation in a different way. But also, if you think about where the jobs are and where some of the best jobs are, quite frankly, look at the buildable land in the region. It's far out. And so, we can all talk about we don't want sprawl and We don't want to see, we don't want to see jobs go to this county or that county or adjacent county or what have you. But we do have to take a regional approach. The time is here. We've already seen the census numbers. We've already seen the growth. People are coming here. They're going to keep coming here. And when you're talking about getting someone who chooses to live perhaps in the core city but needs to get to a job in Etna or down in Groveport or further along, regardless of what the job pays, if they don't have to pay a big transportation bill, that feeds into their overall cost of their living. So when we look at housing at YWCA Columbus, it's not just about the cost of the house and the amount of money that the person makes, but it's what are the transportation costs that go along with it. That's where you start to look at what a household, affordability and household income. And the other thing I will say, Mike, is I want to thank Mayor Ginther and the LinkUS team and COTA and MORPC for having organizations like YWCA Columbus and the Columbus Urban League and Impact and many of the large organizations, but even the small nonprofit human service organizations that are serving, kind of the underserved population and having us at the table now. Because most of the time, the design is done without us at the table. And we get brought to the table afterwards, and it's like, how is this going to work for your client? How is this going to work for your customer? And it's like, it's not, but it's already designed. So we are brought in at a very early stage now, and I so appreciate the true partnership that we are experiencing in this community as it relates to transportation and mobility.
Getting folks to and from jobs is a key part of this. And right now, COTA is designed as sort of the hub is downtown and the buses all converge here. Then you transfer, for the most part, to other routes. And it could take sometimes an hour and a half for someone to get to a pretty low-wage job. We've profiled folks who work in home health care, and they ride the bus 90 minutes each way. President Hardin, this plan still kind of has all of the corridors converging downtown, when there are folks who live in Westerville and want to get to Rickenbacker to work on those jobs there, who live in Dublin and want to go to Easton. Can you satisfy those folks? What's the theory behind having all of this coming downtown again?
Well, Mike, I want to tie a couple of things that we've talked about in the last few minutes together. One, we talk about the folks riding in cars because of in the time that it takes. One of the reasons that folks choose cars is because there's not the choice to have an alternative transit that moves folks quicker and faster to not just work, but to their daycare and to those in healthcare and to the other critical things that our families need. One of the important things that we need to know in terms of what Ms. Monica was saying regarding social justice is that our current COTA ridership right now, more than 50% are African American, more than around 50% make less than $25,000 a year. And so if we are talking about how we move folks and move them more efficiently, it does become a social justice issue about making sure that it doesn't take them 2 hours to get home and take care of their family every evening. One of the things that makes LinkUS different in terms of what we're doing now, we're talking about dedicated lanes. We're talking about moving people quicker on lanes and corridors that gets them to their job centers, to their health care, to their child care, and back home in a more efficient way. And then as we think about what this means to affordability in our community, Christie was 100% right. It's not just adding the option. It's that we know that the cost of having a car and needing a car to move around adds around $8,500 a year to a family. And if we're talking about affordability, we're talking about affordable housing, one of the best ways to make it more accessible to everyone is take away that necessity to get around more efficiently. And so by having these focused corridors, by having the growth, by having dedicated lanes, by having making it easier to move around, we think that we actually will move folks more efficiently and help the environment on the way.
Mr. Murdock, there's no light rail in your plan. We've talked about light rail since I moved here 25 years ago. But there's no light rail. Why not?
So we have to think about our goals. And if our goals are to get ready for growth and to deliver on what we're trying to do quickly, we have to not think about the specific type that we might think light rail or passenger rail or whatever is really great. We have to think about what moves people efficiently, what is going to be an efficient, quick investment, and is this going to help us accomplish sustainability and strengthening neighborhoods? And I know that's a roundabout way to answer your question, but bus rapid transit is a way to do that. When we look at the passenger experience, well-done bus rapid transit is about the same as light rail. It feels quick, it's easy access, it moves faster than the car. So if that's an option, we also know it's significantly more affordable than a light rail investment. And this is the key point here. So when we're thinking about the region over the next 20 to 30 years, if we could make an investment in more bus rapid transit and accomplish what we need now for all of these goals we want to accomplish, then why wouldn't we choose that? That sets us up to meet the passenger forecasts we have over the coming decades. It also means we could touch more neighborhoods more quickly, and in a way that to the average rider, it's going to feel as good, if not better.
For those of you who haven't seen what this looks like, they look like light rail trains on the road. They're long, they're in a separate lane. Sometimes the lanes are separated by curbs with stations similar to what you would have at a light rail station at another city perhaps you've been to. And it also allows you correct flexibility. If this line's not working, you can move it. But one of the thrusts of your plan is you want to encourage development along the lines. And if I'm a developer, I would prefer light rail that's not going to go anywhere in 10 years to build a company or a housing project or an apartment building along that light rail line. We've seen that in other cities. Does this hurt you in encouraging developers to make a long-term investment along one of these lines if there are not tracks on the street? Anyone can answer.
Well, if this was just about a transit system, then maybe that's the conversation. But this is about land use policies. We're talking about a zoning rewrite that will encourage focused development along the corridor. And so I think that by making this a full mobility, a full growth strategy, and making sure that that there are with the light rail and with the BRT fixed infrastructure that will go in. There will be fixed infrastructure to make sure that there are level boarding, and so you will know where the growth strategy we've identified as part of the Insight 2050, the corridors that we know for sure. Like you talked about Rickenbacker, we know that is an inland port. We know that there will be job growth, and so by focusing our growth, by focusing these corridors, by focusing transit, and then the land use changes, the zoning policy changes, I think it will encourage development on those corridors and pulling folks so that they're able to live, work, and play next to reliable transit.
Mike, if I could just add on to what Council President Hardin said. To your question, I think that's not exactly what we've seen in other communities. When we look at bus rapid transit, people sometimes get fixed on the word bus, which buses are great. We love COTA. They have a lot of flexibility. But bus rapid transit done in a high quality fashion like we're talking about, it is a fixed investment. It is a fixed corridor. And when we've seen communities around the country install BRT corridors, developers' investment are very much attracted to that because of that predictability. And what the council president was talking about is aligning land use policy around that at the same time, which just further strengthens that case.
Christie, let's talk about the scope of this project. As we've heard, it's much more than transportation. You get to zoning, building facades, open space. Are we biting off more than we can chew with this? This is a transit. At heart, it's getting people around the city, around the community. When you're getting into facades and what the building should look like along these corridors, do you open yourselves up for people to say this isn't going to work and they'll shoot it down?
I don't think so. I like to think big, and that's just me, but I think we as a city have to think big, because of the growth that we're experiencing here, and because, our residents, I think our residents really want us to be thinking bigger. How many times have people said, I wish we had that like Chicago has it, or I wish we had that like Cleveland has it, or what have you. And, it's time to stop talking about I wish or could we, and really start to think about what it can be. Now, what does that mean? It's not just the city or COTA's responsibility to help build all of that out. We've talked about developers. We can talk about the arts community. We can talk about, our Metro Park and our Rec and Park systems and so forth. So I think there's a role for many, including, the human service organizations, to participate in that. And, I want to go back a little bit to just this notion of developers kind of responding to the investment. And, we've talked a lot just in this first half hour about, getting people to, good jobs, people maybe not making, jobs that are allowing them to, earn a livable wage and those kinds of things. But transit is for everyone. Transit is not just for people who, don't make a certain amount of money and can't afford a car. Transit is for everyone. I mean, I live in a, now, I say I live in a one-car household. My husband says it's a two-car household, but I don't ride in his car. So it's really a one-car household. Don't tell him that. But, what do we do when I have the car and he has to get somewhere? He's like, I'll just take the bus, right? I'll take the bus. He frequently has to go out to Cleveland Avenue. He knows how, it's reliable. It's a system that he knows he can get on. He knows how to use it. It gets him out to the Cleveland Avenue corridor to go to Huntington or, whatever business he has to visit. And I think more of us as executives or professionals or, urban, we live in the suburban communities, et cetera. We have to think about using transit in our everyday lives too. It's not just for people who can't afford a car, but it's our new alternative. And how many of us have gone to another community and ridden their bus or their rail line? I know I have, gone on vacation and bought week passes and the whole 9 yards and been, fearless about it, right? Other than, is it the blue line or the orange line or what have you? And we have to embrace that in our community. And so I think it is going to take all of these different sectors to make this work. And it has to be a long view and a long vision. It's not going to happen overnight.
It is CMC's tradition to take questions from the audience, so we will take questions in just a moment. There's a microphone right there, so if you'd like to ask a question, please make your way to the microphone. While we wait for folks to gather, let me ask a question. Lots of numbers on your website, lots of numbers in your document, things like 18 million square foot of recent or planned development in the Northwest Corridor, $3 billion in investment. But there's one number that's missing. How much is this going to cost, and who's going to pay for it? Mr. Murdock, how about you?
Well, thanks, Mike. As we think about it, and I'll get to your question, the cost of doing nothing now will be much more expensive 20 or 30 years from now when we're suffering, and we need to keep that front and center. The LinkUS effort is now at that phase where we are getting to those costs. And what I mean by that is this is not a concept, this is real. Last week, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission included several LinkUS corridors in what is our long-term funding strategy, which means they are now in line to receive federal funding when that project is ready to go. We have a steering committee and a leadership committee diving in to make sure we have the system we want and the system we need. So in some ways, throwing out a specific number right now gets in front of that process. And I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's the truth. We want to make sure we have the system that the community needs. That said, when we look around to other regions in the country who are looking at solutions like we're looking at, these inclusive mass transit, but include bike trails and housing and sustainability and everything else, they're investing significant resources. And if you look at Indianapolis, they've done that. The voters in Austin just did that. And those are good models when we look at how do we find how to fund this, what a package looks like. And maybe the last thing I'll say, and this is not insignificant, is the bipartisan infrastructure bill that's before Congress right now. Both Ohio senators led on this. Senator Portman was one of the key leaders of it. This package provides significant funding for a lot of things in infrastructure, but specifically inclusive infrastructure, mass transit, rail, those type of things. This could open that window of opportunity for our region to move quickly. And if we do it right, we'll be poised to take advantage of some of these things.
I'm not going to give up on trying to get a number.
Yeah.
President Hardin, on page 85 of the 90-page report in the Northwest Corridor, You cite two federal government funding programs. One is for projects under $300 million. One is for projects over $300 million. There are different requirements. So which one would this be? Under 300 million or over 300 million? And is that just for the Northwest Corridor, or is that for the entire project?
Well, to my good friend William's point, we are approaching a critical decision point. The one thing that is our saving grace as a community is that our growth is the Goldilocks effect. It's not too slow, it's not too fast. If we look at our peer cities like Charlotte, like Austin, like Nashville, it got ahead of them. And so we have this, not just an opportunity, we have a really responsibility to act and act now. So we have a critical decision coming before our community about what kind of city we want to look like in 20 and 25 years. And that will take investment. But as William said, but the way that we are partnering, the way that we're working with our regional partners in Gahanna and Westerville and Whitehall, we're really looking to and going to the federal government saying we have a regional plan that will help us move ahead and help us grow our region in a sustainable way. So we can't, I think the answer is we don't know yet. But that's why the critical work is being done right now, today, so that we can come up with that and present a plan that all folks can see themselves in.
Not even a ballpark number? All right, let's go to the questions. Go ahead.
Well, we have some questions for people online, and those of you who are in the room, please come up, and we'll do every other one. So if you have questions, just come on up, and we'll get you in. Trevin Flickinger asked, for daily transit riders, it's hard to get excited about an initiative, i.e. bus rapid transit, that won't get implemented for 5 to 10 years. What is the City of Columbus and COTA doing to make the bus faster, more frequent, and more reliable right now? Has there been any discussion on piloting pop-up bus lanes similar to Boston in 2016 to 2018, and in the meantime to show the benefits of bus rapid transit?
Well, I can take the last part for sure. One of the ways that Boston moved forward with their planning process was to do pop-up lanes. And over the last 2 years, the City of Columbus, working with the mayor, we've piloted pop-up lanes on several corridors. And what we found is that it moved folks faster, that folks found it more reliable, that folks enjoyed it. And so I think it's all of our responsibility to move and move now. And that's why I think this conversation is really important today. We don't have a moment to waste as we continue to grow.
A reminder, please say your name and where you're from, and please keep your questions brief and to the point.
Yeah, I'm Yarmir Steiner from Chillicothe, Ohio, and I'm the chair for mission advancement of the ULI. The Chillicothe was a joke. President Hardin, thank you for mentioning that this transit approach is not just about moving people, but also will come with a package, regarding zoning. And we also understand the benefits for the families, living or working and saving the $8,500 a year per car. But we also to understand for everyone that when these transit corridors get created, the zoning requirements will change. As you don't need a car, you don't need that many parking in the buildings. So the developers, like myself, will benefit from that as well. So are you planning to use that benefit for the developers to alleviate some other issues in our community, like inclusion of housing, for example, affordable housing, workforce housing requirements as part of this effort?
Yeah, thank you, Yarmir, for that question. I think that the zoning rewrite that's being led out of our Building and Zoning Services is considering all of those options. One of the amazing things about, or one of the great opportunities that we have with LinkUS is that it brings together many different initiatives to solve several different issues that we're facing, mainly being affordable housing. We know that the zoning code as it states right now does not allow us to build and to grow in a way that will incorporate those 15,000 jobs that we're creating each year. We know that we're building 5,000 houses a year. And so if we just project out, we know that we're going to just continue to have that dearth of housing if we don't use this initiative and others to move us forward. And so that's why we're really excited about this being a multi-layered and multi-approach to several different issues that we're facing.
So there are several questions that are sort of in the same vein. Kathy Fox asked, what is the status of the corridor planning and how soon will the shovels go in the ground? How will these development projects be different than what we have done to date?
When will the shovel go in the ground?
Well, to the second part of the question, how is this different than before? I think that's a really critical question, because what we're talking about here is a type of mass transit that Central Ohio does not have right now. We're talking about high-quality bus rapid transit that looks and feels like an amenity you should expect if you're in a world-class city. And that's something that we deserve, that's something we can expect, and that's very different. It's also very different because LinkUS is not just about mass transit. So this is a new concept where we are not just building a road or building a bus lane. We're incorporating how our bike and pedestrian network fits into this. We're looking at how housing and development ties to this. So this is fundamentally different than how we viewed our ability to grow and maintain and improve that quality of life. So I think that's really important. As far as the shovels and things, well, we got to have the engineering and we got to get funded. These projects take a couple years, but I would think, not to overcommit us, but I think it's reasonable to expect it in this decade. So I think that's really reasonable.
Can you explain the follow-up to how there are 6 or 7 of these corridors. The northwest corridor is the most fleshed out right now. The east-west is not far behind. How do you decide which one goes first?
I can jump in it, or Monica?
So I would say that along the east-west corridor, COTA envisions that vehicles will be traveling on West Broad and Main Street will not only trigger green traffic lights, but so there's going to be special platforms, dedicated signals to keep them moving. They will have their own center lanes for the corridors. In addition, the transit stops will have raised platforms so you can bring your bicycles and wheelchairs. So I think, again, it's just really planning for what we're going to need when it comes to meeting the needs of people. And again, I think we have to really stress that this is a future-focused plan, knowing what we're going into and being mindful of, if housing is tied directly to transportation. And so how do we plan to ensure that we are providing access to as many people as possible for the quality of life, not that those of us in this room are experiencing, but for those who are not in this room. And so we've got to always be thinking in terms of how do we ensure that those who are at the table are part of the decision-making process.
President Hardin, the northwest one basically goes along Olentangy River Road from Bethel Road to downtown. That's where the rapid bus line would be. Why is that first on the list and the east-west second, and then the other ones to follow that? How was that priority made?
Well, one of the added benefits to talking about BRT is that, and one of the unique things that we're doing here in Central Ohio that other communities have rarely done, is talk about doing more than one corridor at the same time. And so what we are trying to do is have an equitable approach to how we build out this system so that it touches multiple neighborhoods and serves multiple issues in our community. And so I think the Northwest Corridor and the East-West Corridor speaks to job growth, speaks to moving folks in and out of our community, speaks to healthcare, making sure they're connected to a large healthcare center. East and West Broad Street to job centers, to where people live. So we have a real opportunity to do something that no other city really has done, which is to tackle this all in a comprehensive way and moving more than one corridor at the same time.
I assume that's another reason why light rail is a disadvantage. That's a much bigger project, and it's hard to do a north-south rail and an east-west rail simultaneously. Am I wrong there?
No, it's much more expensive.
Much more
expensive. And when you're talking about which corridors go first, to build on Council President's point, we looked at what corridors would have the most impact. Potential development, what communities could benefit by connections to jobs. We looked at travel times. We looked at environmental impacts. And Mike, you started us off really well by focusing us on the Olentangy Trail, which is the busiest trail. And so this is looking at improvements not just to that mass transit, but where do we see traffic patterns that we could improve, reinforce. And there's been a lot of thought by, I see about a dozen staff members in the room who've really looked at everything from equity to sustainability to make sure we're starting with the corridors that have the most impact.
And it will make us the most competitive when we go to the federal government to apply for those grants.
Buses are still buses and don't have the same cachet as other mass transit, such as light rail and modern streetcars. What is in the plan to change people's perception of buses?
I think we have to show folks actually what we're talking about. I think that in Columbus we might have a vision of what BRT is, but what we're really talking about is, to Mike's point, these dedicated lanes, something that we've not seen before with these raised platforms where you can walk in. These things do not look like traditional buses, which are fine and which move people around, but what folks really want is not what it looks like and what it feels like, but how it actually makes them, how it affects their daily lives. And what we're talking about is a BRT system that will drastically change the quality of life for our residents. And I think that folks will get very excited when they see it, but more so when they experience what our BRT system would bring to Columbus and to our region.
The other question is the last mile and the last mile, the first mile, the mile to get to the stop on this line. How are we going to do that to folks who live outside of these direct corridors within, say, a quarter mile or a half mile? Anyone? How do we solve that problem? That's a huge problem, especially in the wintertime when it's raining and snowing. And
It is.
Yeah.
It is a very big issue, and I know that COTA and a number of the communities, not just Columbus, have been very thoughtfully looking at how to do that. The system that we're talking about with LinkUS, the mass transit part, even the trails, this is the hub of a regional system. So COTA's network will, if I can say this, will feed into this and continue to get better. Our trail network will continue to feed into this. But when we think about that first mile, last mile, that's really important. If you think about the experience of the people who need transit, because if there's no sidewalk, if it's dark, if it's uncomfortable, sometimes you don't have a choice. And we owe it to our community to provide the type of experience, the type of way to get around our community that people have dignity and have the ability to access places without having to get off of a transit stop and walk a half a mile through mud to work at a job. And that's something that is really core to our work at MORPC. We've done a lot of thought on this. I know COTA and the city and others are thinking about how to build those stops and ensure that that's part of what we're thinking. And LinkUS specifically does that along those corridors.
Sir.
Mark Conti with the Capital Crossroads and Discovery Special Improvement Districts downtown. With the increasing alarms going off with wildfires, intense storms, hurricanes, what other thoughts do you have about getting even more aggressive on sustainability with regard, whether it's with transit or other efforts, including the recent efforts with the city trying to get more trees, which is fantastic? Thanks.
No, Mark, thank you for that question. One of the cornerstones of the LinkUS initiative is helping to solve our global issue, which is the climate change and the effects on the environment. We know that the greatest impact to emissions in our community and around the country is transportation. We also know that in Central Ohio that 80% of our workforce takes single occupancy vehicles to and from work every day. If we are going to add 500,000 to 1 million people, we cannot afford, our children cannot afford to have those added emissions into our community. So we see that this as a layered approach on top of everything else that the city of Columbus is doing in terms of moving us forward on our environmental plans.
And if I can add the idea that COTA has gone from compressed natural gas to electric vehicles. So this is all in the plan. And so again, it's just trying to be very intentional in ensuring that we shrink the size of our thumbprint in our community. And so that's the plan.
Christie, you want to get a little bit more on how, if folks can afford to live along one of these lines, are there systems in place in your plan to make sure that affordable housing is built along the Olentangy corridor, along that east-west corridor, along the corridor that goes out to the airport? What kind of guarantees can the folks who can't afford these rents now have that they're going to be able to afford an apartment along this line?
Well, at this point, I would say there are no plans in this particular, in the LinkUS plan, but that's my other job that I do for Mayor Ginther. We're working on a recovery and resiliency plan that you'll hear about later, but contemplates some very specific affordable housing initiatives, some master planning and discussion around where housing, how we get more affordable housing, where housing should go, and then the city has hired a new assistant director of housing, Erin Prosser. And Erin, working with her, I'm sure, that there will be a discussion about where housing should go that then links, no pun intended, to LinkUS. And then lastly, I'll say it can't just be a City of Columbus responsibility. Housing, affordable housing, all the types of housing. We mentioned our brothers and sisters in Whitehall, Reynoldsburg, Arlington, because I see my former colleague over there, Westerville, et cetera, right? They have to build out as well and be thinking about their the types of housing they build and how does it connect into the system. So again, not an all-in-one kind of a plan, but a plan that should connect into larger and other initiatives.
Mike, I would go a step further than that, though. I think transit-oriented development done right does make affordability the cornerstone of it, because we have to remember who we're trying to serve and how we move people. And so the only way that we're going to build affordable housing on these corridors is by having a real conversation around density and land use policies. So the building prices are not going down, the labor costs are not going down. So the one thing that we have on our precious resource, which is land, is to make sure that we're developing it right, and transit-oriented development is a way to do it. And so I think it is actually a cornerstone of the LinkUS plan, and we won't move forward unless there is affordability built into it.
And to Mr. Steiner's point, he mentioned, developers who build along this, and then, some return, right, on, whatever that looks like, but, right, the return on the investment of a developer who decides to be a part of this plan and to make affordability actually affordable to build, okay? It's hard to build affordable housing because of the zoning policy and the land use policies and all of those things. So there's a lot of change that has to occur. And we as neighbors, have to be ready to embrace this type of housing in our community. Housing that doesn't have a 3-car garage. Housing that doesn't have, apartments that don't have 2 spaces per unit or whatever 2.5 spaces, which you've never seen a half of a car, but okay. We as neighbors have to do our part, and we have to embrace this change, and we have to stop saying no to every single development that comes into our community because it doesn't have, this kind of setback and these kind of side yards and this kind of garage and all of those things. That we can't afford to keep doing that in our community.
We have time for one more question. Go ahead, Jen.
Which leads right into this question. Talk more about how transportation can actually incentivize the development along the corridors without the zoning changes and without the new zoning plan. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
I mean, they're congruent. We're in the middle of our zoning rewrite as we speak. It is we have not had a zoning rewrite mayor in 60 years. And so we are in the middle of that right now. And so we see these processes moving in concert. We can't do one without the other if we really are going to solve the bigger issues. William?
No, I think you hit it. Yeah.
Bob Weiler, well-known developer. I'm not sure he's still on the COTA board or not. He advocates no fares for COTA buses. How about no fares for the bus rapid transit?
Currently, we are in the midst of a fare management policy change, and so we are trying to address that. I mean, the bottom line is we want to be equitable, and so we want to ensure that we are not allowing those the most vulnerable, we're not requiring them to pay the most of their resources. So the new system will actually be fare capping, and so once you hit the maximum amount, you'll pay no additional fees for it. So we're not at free, but we are addressing it so that we can ensure equitable transportation and access for all. And we're being intentional about that. Maybe 25, 30 years from now, it'll be a different conversation. But right now, we want to make sure that everybody is able to ride on COTA.
Well, thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to you all for listening. There's a lot to this project. We had a very short time. I urge you all to check out the website, learn as much as you can, read that 95-page report, and make up your own mind and watch this as it goes forward, because it is pretty exciting. But thank you all.
I hope everyone found today's forum to be very insightful. And to Mike's point, you do have a brochure on your table that you can find the link to read that 90-plus page report and learn more. Please make plans now to join us at our next Wednesday CMC, where we'll be presenting the Columbus Downtown Development Corporation Review. And our thanks to today's forum sponsors, AARP Ohio, HNTB, and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. And thank you to our online virtual seat patrons. And of course, a special thanks and appreciation to all of today's speakers, Mayor Andrew J. Ginther, Christie Angel, Council President Shannon Hardin, Monica Jones, William Murdock, and of course, Mike Thompson. Thank you so much. Last but not least, we cannot do this without you. So we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as the CMC presents another community conversation. Thank you.